Good parenting is paying attention, but there's this really thin gray line that's so hard to distinguish when we cross over.
Hey friends, I'm Jody and this is Mom Life. And we know as moms that motherhood is messy, it's challenging, it's also beautiful and rewarding. All the things, and we're gonna be diving into all of it. And today's guest is that friend we all want, that wise listening ear, that person who has heard and seen it all and can come alongside us and do what we do here at Mom Life, encourage one another and champion one another. So Sissy Goff, I am so thrilled to welcome you today.
I'm so delighted to be with you.
Thank you so much. Well, I know people know you from your best-selling books and from your podcast, Raising Boys and Girls, but your main hustle, your main gig is Daystar Counseling Ministries, and you help thousands of families. You're such a deep well. We could talk about discipline strategies. We could talk about how to help our kids find and navigate friendships, sibling conflict, so many things. But Sissy, I want to just dive into the deep end and talk about anxiety and worry today because, it is such an epidemic in our culture. I've heard that 1 in 3 parents is anxious, is worried. What actually is that? What's the definition of anxiety?
Well, there's a very clinical definition, but where I land is that, all of us have hundreds of intrusive thoughts every single day. So worst case scenario thoughts, I really failed there thoughts.
What if?
Right, exactly. And when we're not anxious, those thoughts come in and they go right back out. When we lean towards anxiety, the thought comes in and it gets stuck. With kids, I'll say it's like the one loop roller coaster at the fair. And so it just goes around and around and around. And it's interesting because with kids, we could really track their development, which means they loop about the scariest thing they can imagine at that age. So little ones, it's being away from mom and dad. Older ones, being embarrassed in front of their peers. And it's why so many parents will say to me, I never had any anxiety until I became a parent. Because the thing that matters the most matters more than anything ever has.
Yeah. So how does that really show up in our parenting? How do you know if a parent is an anxious parent? Because we all worry. Worry's normal.
Absolutely.
But
yes. I think the looping thoughts, which mean when you get stuck and when your response is bigger than the situation warrants. So you haven't heard from them. They're 3 minutes past curfew and you are losing it and texting them 500 times. Or with the little one, you haven't heard yet back from the teacher on something you were worried about, and you just find yourself spinning out and having this really big reaction. And I think that's always a great time to pay a little more attention to what's happening inside of us.
Yeah, look at our reactions.
Yes.
And you talk about the difference between being vigilant, which is good as a parent, we want to be on it.
Required.
And hypervigilant.
Yes.
What is that?
Well, I think it's that loop. It's that sense of I'm sending my daughter off to school. She's been having a hard time with friends. And so now I'm going to go pick her up and I'm watching every muscle on her little face. I can't think of anything else. And she gets in the car and I'm just, how was your day? How did this person do? That intensity that I think, and because we're talking about mom life, I think as women, we carry it even more significantly sometimes. And so being aware of when are you able to let things go and when does it feel like you're really stuck in that sense of hypervigilance and watching and hovering, because that's where we go with it.
Yeah, and maybe even you've talked about how it can masquerade as a good trait.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It feels like good parenting. I mean, good parenting is paying attention, but there's this really thin gray line that's so hard to distinguish when we cross over. And I think, Jody, too, I feel like parents today are the most educated parents there have ever been. And all the people we follow, all the things that are going on social media, and sometimes it's too much. It's too many voices. And I think it makes the anxiety worse.
Yeah. And you said earlier, your kid gets home from school and you're looking at their face. Did they have a good day?
Yes.
Is anxiety contagious? Like our kids can pick it up?
Yes.
Oh.
And even genetically, I don't want parents to hear that and feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why my child's anxious. Genetically, if you have anxiety, your kids are 7 times more likely to as well. And so there's that component, but also our parenting strategies certainly contribute to it.
Yeah. Well, how do we keep from passing that? If you're a mom and you're very aware that you might have looping thoughts or you're wondering if you've crossed the line from normal parent worry or concern or paying attention to that hyper. Like, how do we kind of put the check there so that it doesn't pass on to our kids?
I would say doing our own work and really all the way around, I think the best thing parents can do in any situation is to do their own work. So when that rises up in you, that you have a trusted friend that you can call and say, hey, I think this might have been more about me than about them. Or you have a therapist yourself that you can talk to. And we talk a lot about parents having code words. So if your spouse is in the home, they see you spinning out, they can say, are we having pizza for dinner tonight, or something that you've prearranged to be the signal of, I think you're getting bigger than you need to be in this situation.
And that is so good, because then your child is not necessarily going to pick that up the way if one spouse says to the other, honey, you're spinning.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes,
good.
exactly.
So good. Well, talk about, because the things we worry about a lot of times are when we see our kid struggling. You know, maybe they don't have a good friend group. Maybe they didn't get into the school they wanted to get into if they're older. Maybe they are the toddler who's biting. You know, whatever it is, no parent wants to watch their child walk a hard path. But you say that sometimes we have to trust the process, and we can talk about the hard things our kids face. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I love that question. And I would encourage anybody who's listening to think about your own story. And when are the times that you really grew the most, that you feel the most proud of? And I think for all of us, it's when we went through hard things. And so remembering that as we're watching the kids we love struggle, I mean, when we step in, so the kind of the layperson's definition of anxiety that I came up with is that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of themselves. And in light of anxiety, the two most common responses for parents are escape and avoidance. So they come upon the hard thing and I'm going to pull them out. And when we do, that basically reinforces the definition. You're right. It's too hard. You can't handle it. You need me to step in. And we need the kids we love to know that they can do hard things, because hard things are required of us every single day. And so I think when we can think about that, when we can back up and think, this is the long run that I'm thinking about for them, and it's growing good things. We know suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. I mean, that is the only path that I'm aware of outside of Jesus in Scripture to lead to hope.
Yeah.
And so we talk a lot with parents about what are 2 things you're doing for your kids right now that they can do for themselves, and what are 2 things you're doing for your kids that they can almost do for themselves.
2 things, say that again.
2 things you're doing for your kids that they can do for themselves. And
Getting their lunch, or finding their shoes.
Yes,
or,
filling their water bottle.
Okay.
You know, just the practical things. And what are 2 things they can almost do for themselves? And we want you to stop doing all 4.
Wow.
Because they're capable. And you're capable.
Yeah.
You're letting them do it.
That is so practical and so good. Well, you know, I've heard lots of people talk about the helicopter parent.
Yes.
You know, and we're like, oh, don't want to be that.
Right.
But you also identify some other parenting whoopsies that maybe we want to avoid. What? Talk about some of those.
Yes. So it's really the 5 most common types of parents that I see in my office. The helicopter parent is one, which we know, hovering, trying to fix all of the things. The sidecar parent, so I always think about the old Adam West, Batman, right? They're next to me. And so what that means is my experience is their experience. I can think of a mom who, her daughter was struggling with friends. She had struggled with friends. Hers was because she was anxious and introverted, and she brought her daughter in to me and said, I think my daughter has the same thing going on. And I met her daughter, and she just was kind of aggressive and not that kind. And so it was a whole different situation. But I think it's easy to feel like that. My situation is their situation. Let me see if I can remember all of them. The parade float parent. So I'm going to try and make everything fun and happy so they don't have to feel sad. They don't have to feel anxious.
Remove any sad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
My mom was a parade float parent, and I did not know this was not normal until I became an adult, Jody. But when I was growing up, if we had a dog die, my mom went out and bought the same kind of dog the same day and named it the same thing.
No missing the dog. Here we go. Replacement dog.
Right. I don't know how she didn't think I would notice. It went from an adult dog to a puppy, but we had 2 Dixies, 2 Blues.
Oh, my.
And my grandmother did it too. So I come from a long line of parade float parents.
Okay.
Then we have the snowplow parent. So I'm going to smooth the path ahead of my kids, make sure they don't hit any bumps, moguls, hard places, which I'm probably seeing that more than ever.
Sure.
And then the last would be the backhoe parent. So I'm going to clean up the mistakes after them so that they don't have to deal with the consequences of that. And I mean, I had a family who sued the school because the daughter didn't make cheerleading. That feels like a backhoe parent. And we're at that kind of place now that parents are that hypervigilant, intervening that much, and it's just not good for kids.
Well, back to the whole anxiety thing. Does it show up differently in girls and boys?
Yes.
Yeah.
It certainly does. And I talk about, in Raising Worry-Free Girls, I talk about a continuum from imploders to exploders. And if our dear friend David Thomas were sitting here, who works with a lot of boys, he would say a lot of boys lean towards being really explosive. So they get big with their emotions when they're anxious. They go outward. I read a study years ago that talked about when something goes wrong in a boy's world, he blames someone else. And when something goes wrong in a girl's world, we blame ourselves.
We blame ourselves.
Every age. We continue to do it. And so boys a lot of times will go outward with that anxiety, and girls can go inward. Now, the caveat is little girls don't. I think a lot of times little girls will go outward, and then they shift to an age where they think this isn't as appropriate. I don't want to be angry. This is embarrassing, or it's not right. And so they'll go inward with it then. And the hard thing is, it's interesting because girls are twice as likely as boys to deal with anxiety. Women are twice as likely as men, but boys are taken to get help more. And I think some of that's because boys are exploding.
Yeah,
and
so you're seeing those signs.
Yes, and the anxious girl is the one at the parent-teacher conference that the teacher says, I wish every child in my class was just like your daughter. And it's really because she's anxious and so perfectionistic inside. And that anger is being directed inward. And so we really want to pay attention to and help kids in both spaces.
Well, speaking of, what are some of the practical things that we can do if we're seeing an implosion or an explosion? What can parents do to help our kids navigate worry and fear?
Well, I'll tell you the first 3 things I would do in my office. So this is like 6 months of counseling for free for listeners.
Yay. Listen up.
First is breathing. And as silly as that sounds, as much as we talk about breathing, it really does shift what's happening in our brain. When I'm feeling really anxious, the blood flow is leaving the prefrontal cortex, which helps me think rationally and manage our emotions, and it's going to my amygdala, which is the fight or flight part of our brain. And so when we can do some deep breathing, it dilates the blood vessels in our brain, and it shifts the blood back to the thinking part of our brain.
Okay, but you're not talking about breathing like we're breathing here.
Right. So what we do is we draw a really slow square. So I would breathe in for 4 seconds with the first line. I can't do it and talk at the same time.
Okay.
Pause for 4 seconds. Breathe out for 4 seconds with the second line. Pause for 4 seconds. Back in for 4 seconds, and then a full square.
Okay.
And basically 20 seconds of deep breathing begins the process of resetting the amygdala.
Wow.
So it really is a game changer. I mean, it's helpful. I do it often.
Yeah.
As an adult. So we want to help the kids we love do that. And they can do it on the free throw line. They can do it in their desk, and no one will see them if they're about to have to make a speech in class. There are a million ways to use it. So we always start with breathing or movement. Sometimes kids need to move first. Then we use what are called grounding techniques, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy tool. And basically, anxiety really is in the past and the future. So I'm thinking about what did happen. I'm thinking about the terrible thing that might happen. We want to bring kids, we want to bring ourselves back to the present. And so grounding techniques are typically sensory related because sensory data takes place here. So sight, sound, smell. So my favorite is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Tell me 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you feel from a tactile sense, 1 thing you taste. So it's basically the 5 senses. And if I were to really, we won't take the time to do that, but if I were to have you do that right now, especially the hear, taste requires you to focus.
Yes.
And think about what's happening in this moment. And it's hard to be anxious and do that at the same time. So there are a million grounding techniques out there that are great. I love to say to kids, tell me 3 things you see, 3 things you hear, wiggle 3 parts of your body.
Yeah.
Because kids need to move. So breathing, grounding, and then I want to help kids give the worried voice a name. So that little voice in the back of their heads that's saying, you can't do it. It's too hard. We all have that voice. And when we can name it, it reduces its power and it takes it outside of ourselves. So the worry monster, unless kids are afraid of monsters, then we don't want to do that. The worry bug, sometimes with kids we'll call it the worry brain versus smart brain. Then teaching them to interact with it, to boss it back or wrestle it down, we'll call it with boys. So I'm not listening to you, worry monster. You're never right. You lie to me. They can even call it stupid if they're not allowed to say stupid at home. And really, if we're in therapy, one of the first things we're learning is positive self-talk. That's what we're teaching kids. And so teaching them to talk back to the worry in that way can be really life-giving for kids. And they can memorize scripture to do the same. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah, as a pushback.
Yes.
But just as I'm listening to you talk, I think about the things we moms start to spin out about, and to just have that tool of saying, get back.
Yes.
I'm going to boss you back, a little worry whisperer.
Yeah.
I mean, that is good self-talk for us.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Well, and you and I both share a great love for Scripture. We
Yes.
know John 16:33, in this world, Jesus says, you will have trouble, and don't we know it? But take heart, I have overcome the world. So we have that promise,
Yes.
and yet you and I have talked about the fact that one of the issues we face today is that we don't have space for something bad to happen without letting it escalate in our minds to be crisis. Like,
Right.
we know Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. Talk about that headspace, that movement from the bad thing to the crisis.
Yes. Well, I think we've gotten out of expecting trouble. I think is a
Because
huge
all the
part of it.
parents backhoeing and snow plowing and stuff. We don't think they're
Right. Well, and I always think about, this was especially pre-pandemic, but you would see living my best life and best day ever. And we know really in a fallen world, I might live my best life for 5 minutes a day if I'm telling the truth. And so I think when we can really anchor ourselves to that verse, when we can help kids know, and if a scientist was sitting here, they would say one of the best ways to prevent anxiety is to expect it, which is what Jesus is saying, which I love, is where those things come together of when we expect trouble, we know, okay, these are the tools I have. This is what I can do to fight this because Jesus has overcome the world. And I want to remind myself of that truth.
Yeah, removes the surprise factor,
Yes,
so we don't have to even deal with
exactly.
that.
Yes.
Yeah. I just love that, Sissy. So good, so good. It is just, we could talk all day long.
All
You have
day
so
long.
much wisdom, and
Oh,
it's just
you
drops
have so
out.
much
I'm over
wisdom.
here picking up the pearls.
No.
It is so good. It is so
Jody, I'm
good.
so
Well,
grateful for
thank
you,
you for being
friend.
with us. Thank you, and thank you. And one of the things Sissy mentioned was that suffering produces perseverance, endurance. And that produces character, which we all want in our kids and which we want in ourselves. And that leads to hope. And that scripture from Romans 5 goes on and it says, hope does not disappoint us. God's love is poured into our hearts. And I want you to hold on to that, Mama. So thanks so much for being with us today. And in the description below, you'll find a link to some of these verses and some prayers, some things I've chosen specially for you on this topic. You can click that link, pray with us, and know that God is at work. And yes, in this world we will have trouble, but we can take heart because He has overcome the world. Thanks so much for being with us today on Mom Life. We'll see you next time.